The flash of cameras painted the Crowhurst name in light across the city, a symbol of untouchable power and staggering wealth. At the center of it all was Leander Crowhurst, a man who carved his empire from the bedrock of Wall Street, his charming smile a mask for a chasm of cruelty. Beside him, in a gilded wheelchair, was his wife, Lysandra, a woman once celebrated for her vibrant spirit, now regarded as a beautiful broken doll, a permanent fixture of his philanthropic facade. For 5 years, the world saw a devoted husband caring for his disabled wife. But behind the closed doors of their palatial estate and in the viper's nest of high society, a different story was unfolding, one of chilling neglect and public humiliation. Tonight, at his grandest charity gala, Leander was about to discard his broken toy for a new one, but he had no idea that his wife's silence was not weakness. It was a cage, holding back a secret so monumental it would not just leave him speechless, it would leave him with nothing. The Crowhurst estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was less a home and more a monument to Leander's ego. It sprawled over 50 acres of meticulously manicured land, a cold neoclassical fortress of white marble and glass that stared blankly out at the Long Island Sound. Inside, the silence was cavernous, broken only by the distant hum of the climate control system and the whisper-soft tread of the staff. For Lysandra Crowhurst, née Fairborn, this fortress had been her prison for 5 years. Before the accident, Lysandra had been a force of nature, a gifted equestrian with a laugh that could fill a stadium and a mind as sharp as her father's, the legendary financier Robert Fairborn. She had met Leander when he was just a hungry, ambitious protege under her father's wing. Robert saw the raw talent in Leander, but also a dangerous ruthlessness he tried to temper. Lysandra saw a man whose ambition she mistook for passion, whose intensity she mistook for love. They were married in a ceremony dubbed the Merger of the Year by society pages. Then came the rain-slicked highway, the screech of tires, and the brutal, metallic crunch that had shattered her world. The accident had claimed the use of her legs, and in a way, her husband. In the beginning, Leander had played the part of the doting, grief-stricken husband flawlessly. He was the tragic hero bound by love and duty to his beautiful, broken wife. The narrative sold well, earning him sympathetic profiles in business magazines and fawning admiration at social events. But when the cameras were gone, the mask fell away. His sympathy curdled into impatience, then into thinly veiled contempt. Her wheelchair became an inconvenience, a blemish on his perfect life. He spoke to her as if she were a child, or worse, a piece of furniture he was forced to navigate around. Lysandra, for God's sake, can you have Maria move you to the West Solarium? You're in the main sightline from the foyer, he'd say, not looking at her as he knotted his tie in the reflection of a framed portrait of himself. Her physical therapy sessions, once a priority he attended, were now a solitary struggle in the mansion's private gym, her grunts of effort and pain echoing in the empty room. He hadn't attended one in 3 years. He called her fragile in public, but in private his words were daggers. Don't try to understand the business, Lysandra. It's too stressful for your condition. Just rest and look pretty. That's all I need from you. The household staff saw it all. Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, who had been with the Fairborn family since Lysandra was a girl, saw it with a heavy heart. She saw how Leander would host lavish dinner parties, placing Lysandra at the far end of the table like an afterthought. She saw how he would forget to have the temporary ramp installed for outdoor events, leaving Lysandra confined to the terrace watching the festivities from a distance. She saw the arrival of expensive gifts, jewelry, designer clothes that were not tokens of affection, but payments for her silence, props for the role he forced her to play. And for the last 6 months, Mrs. Gable had seen something else. The lingering scent of a strange, cloyingly sweet perfume on Leander's suits, the late-night arrivals, and the secretive phone calls he took in his study. his voice a low, intimate murmur. The new woman was Octavia Rossi, a raven-haired, ambitious art gallery assistant, half his age with a hunger in her eyes that mirrored a younger Leander. She was everything Lysandra was not able-bodied, unburdened by tragedy, and most importantly, new. Leander paraded her around discreetly at first at out-of-the-way restaurants in the city, but his arrogance was growing. He felt untouchable. Lysandra knew. Of course, she knew. She wasn't deaf or blind. She saw the credit card statements left carelessly on his desk charges for hotels she'd never visited, florists she'd never used. She felt the shift in the atmosphere, the final chilling frost that settled over their already cold marriage. She endured it with a quiet, unnerving stoicism that Leander mistook for defeated acceptance. He believed the accident had broken, not just her body, but her spirit. He couldn't have been more wrong. Her father, Robert Fairborn, had been a brilliant man. He had built his own empire from nothing and had seen the world for what it was, a place where sharks swam and you either learned to swim with them or you were eaten. He adored his daughter, and while he'd approved of her marriage to his promising protégé, he was not a man who left things to chance. His final act before his death, from a sudden coronary 2 years after Lysandra's accident, was not to write a simple will, but to construct a fortress of his own around his daughter's future, a fortress far more powerful than Leander's marble mansion. It was a secret he had shared only with Lysandra and one other person, Marcus Thorne, the family's longtime attorney and Lysandra's godfather. "He has the killer instinct, Ellie," her father had told her, in a hushed tone, from his hospital bed, his voice weak, but his eyes sharp. "I helped him hone it. But men like that, their hunger is never satisfied. Love for them is a transaction, a merger, and they are always looking for a better deal. Promise me you'll never forget that. Promise me you'll be prepared." Lysandra had promised, and in the long silent hours in her wheelchair, she hadn't been idly resting. She had been studying. With Marcus's help, she had devoured books on corporate law, finance, and market strategy. She had turned her lonely solarium into a command center, her tablet a window into the world of high-stakes finance that Leander thought was so far beyond her grasp. She tracked every stock, every merger, every whisper on Wall Street, especially those concerning Crowhurst Capital. She was not a broken doll. She was a sleeping giant. The annual Crowhurst Foundation Gala for Children's Health was the crown jewel of Leander's philanthropic efforts. It was a night of obscene opulence disguised as charity, where billionaires and politicians gathered to write tax-deductible checks and congratulate each other on their generosity. This year, Leander had been unusually insistent about the details of Lysandra's appearance. He'd commissioned a custom gown from Oscar de la Renta, a stunning creation of silver silk that shimmered like moonlight on water. He'd even hired a top stylist to do her hair and makeup. "I want you to be the most beautiful woman in the room, darling," he'd said, his voice slick with false affection. "Tonight is a very, very important night. I have a special announcement." Lysandra looked at her reflection in the mirror as the stylist put the finishing touches on her hair. She saw the woman Leander wanted the world to see, elegant, tragic, beautiful and silent. A perfect accessory. A wave of cold certainty washed over her. She knew what was coming. The whispers she'd overheard, the smug look in Leander's eyes, the sudden boldness of his infidelity, it was all leading to this. He wasn't just going to leave her. He was going to use the grandest stage he could find to do it. He was going to humiliate her in front of the world to cement his own narrative of a man moving on from tragedy. "Mrs. Crowhurst, you look breathtaking," the young stylist gushed. Lysandra offered a small, sad smile. "Thank you, dear." Later, as Maria, her quiet and loyal caregiver, helped her into the wheelchair, Lysandra caught Mrs. Gable's eye in the hallway. The older woman's face was a mask of worry and pity. Lysandra gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a gesture that said, Don't worry. Not for me. As they descended in the glass elevator, Leander was waiting at the bottom, dressed in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He looked every bit the master of the universe. Ah, there she is, he boomed, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. My beautiful Lysandra, perfection. He leaned down, not to kiss her, but to adjust a fold of her gown over her legs, a proprietary gesture that was more about stage managing a prop than affection. Are you ready for the big night? I'm ready, Leander, she said, her voice even and calm. He smiled, a wide, predatory smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. He had no idea what she was truly ready for. He saw a lamb being led to slaughter. He was about to find out he was stepping into a cage with a lioness. The ballroom at the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and shimmering gowns. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and blooming peonies, buzzed with the low thrum of powerful conversations. Waiters weaved through the throngs of people, their silver trays laden with champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. This was Leander Crowhurst's court, and tonight he was king. He navigated Lysandra's wheelchair through the crowd with a practiced, performative grace, one hand resting on her shoulder. To the assembled guests, they were the picture of tragic nobility. He would pause every few feet to accept condolences for her condition and praise for his unwavering devotion. Leander, you're a saint, gushed a senator's wife, her face a taut mask of plastic surgery. She's lucky to have you, rumbled a banking tycoon, clapping Leander on the shoulder. Leander would nod gravely, squeezing Lysandra's shoulder for effect. She is my life, he'd say, his voice resonating with rehearsed sincerity. I would be nothing without my Lysandra. Lysandra remained silent, her expression serene, a faint Mona Lisa smile on her lips. She met the pitying glances of the other women with a calm that they misinterpreted as resignation. Inside, her heart was beating a steady, rhythmic drum of cold fury. Each word of praise for Leander was a log on the fire of her resolve. She watched him soak in the adulation, his ego swelling with every sycophantic remark. He was an actor on his favorite stage, and she was his most valuable prop. They took their seats at the head table, a long, imposing dais overlooking the entire ballroom. The evening progressed, as it always did, a lavish dinner, a silent auction featuring ludicrously expensive items, and then the speeches. The mayor spoke. The hospital chairman spoke. They all lauded Leander Crowhurst, the city's great benefactor, the titan of industry, with a heart of gold. Finally, it was Leander's turn. He rose to a thunderous ovation, stepping up to the podium, which was emblazoned with the Crowhurst Foundation crest. The room fell silent. Spotlights converged on him, making his white teeth gleam. Thank you, thank you. He began, holding up his hands for silence. It is truly humbling to see so many friends here tonight, all of us united in a common cause to build a better future for our children. He spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a masterful tale of corporate responsibility and personal dedication. He talked about his own modest beginnings, a narrative he had polished to a high sheen over the years. Then his tone shifted, becoming more intimate, more somber. He turned his gaze to Lysandra. As many of you know, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was still carried to every corner of the room by the excellent sound system. My own life has been touched by tragedy. 5 years ago, the light of my life, my beautiful wife, Lysandra, suffered a terrible accident. A collective sympathetic sigh rippled through the audience. Lysandra felt hundreds of pairs of eyes settle on her. She kept her gaze fixed on her husband, her expression unreadable. She has faced her challenges with a courage that humbles me every single day. Leander continued, his voice thick with emotion. And I have been honored, truly honored to stand by her side, to be her rock, her caretaker. He paused, letting the weight of his supposed sacrifice settle over the room. He was building his case, laying the foundation for his final brutal act. Lysandra could see the narrative taking shape in the eyes of the audience, the noble, long-suffering husband. But life, he said, turning back to the crowd, is about moving forward. It is about hope. It is about embracing new beginnings. For 5 years, I have lived in the shadow of this tragedy. But I stand before you tonight as a man who has found a reason to hope again, a reason to build a future. The air in the room grew tense. This was not the standard philanthropic script. Guests shifted in their seats, sensing a dramatic turn. Tonight is not just about the foundation, Leander announced, his voice suddenly booming with triumph. It is about a new chapter in my life, a chapter of joy and creation, a chapter that will see the Crowhurst legacy continue for generations to come. He gestured to the side of the stage. From the wings, Octavia Rossi emerged, bathed in a soft secondary spotlight. She was wearing a figure-hugging emerald green dress that deliberately accentuated the gentle swell of her belly. She was pregnant. A wave of audible gasps swept across the ballroom. Whispers erupted like wildfire. People craned their necks, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and salacious excitement. Octavia walked slowly, deliberately towards the dais, her eyes locked on Leander, a triumphant smirk on her face. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered her prize. Leander stepped down from the podium and took her hand, drawing her to his side. He placed a possessive hand on her pregnant stomach, turning them both to face the stunned audience. "My friends," he declared, his voice ringing with pride, "I am going to be a father, Octavia, and I are expecting a son." The announcement detonated in the room. The carefully constructed facade of the devoted husband shattered into a million pieces. All eyes darted from the triumphant couple back to the woman in the wheelchair, to Lysandra. They expected tears. They expected a breakdown, a scene, a scream of outrage. They wanted the drama to reach its messy, emotional climax. Lysandra gave them nothing. She sat perfectly still, her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The serene smile had not wavered. The spotlight still illuminated her silver gown, making her look ethereal, almost saintly, in the face of such a grotesque public betrayal. The contrast was stark and unsettling, Leander and his pregnant mistress beaming under the lights, a picture of fertile ambition, and the discarded wife silent, beautiful, and immobile. Leander, high on his own audacity, seemed to notice her unnatural calm. He needed her to break. Her composure was ruining the narrative. He needed to be seen as a man escaping a tragic, joyless life, not a cruel bully kicking a woman who was already down. He walked over to her, his smile tightening. He leaned down, his voice a stage whisper, meant for the front tables to hear. "Lysandra, I know this is difficult, but it is time for a new life, a real life. Octavia can give me a child, an heir. I hope in time you can find it in your heart to understand." It was the final patronizing twist of the knife. He wasn't just leaving her, he was publicly declaring her useless, incapable of fulfilling the one role his ego demanded. Lysandra finally moved. She lifted her head and looked directly into his eyes. The serene smile was gone, replaced by something he had never seen before, a look of glacial, profound pity. "Understand," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying in the shocked silence. "Oh, Leander, I understand more than you could possibly imagine." Then, without another word, she turned her head and looked at Mrs. Gable, who was standing anxiously by the exit as prearranged. Miss Gable nodded curtly and began to add Fairborn. Leander, momentarily confused by this unexpected exchange, was pushed aside as Maria, Lysandra's caregiver, stepped forward. Together, Mrs. Gable and Maria expertly maneuvered Lysandra's wheelchair away from the head table. They moved with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. The whispers died down as Lysandra made her slow procession through the stunned crowd. It was not the hurried, tearful escape of a victim. It was the measured, deliberate exit of a queen. The path parted before her as if by royal decree. Her silver dress shimmered, her head held high. She did not look back. Leander was left standing on the stage, Octavia's hand in his, a flicker of confusion clouding his triumphant expression. He had expected a messy, satisfying implosion. He had gotten a quiet, dignified retreat that somehow left him looking like the smaller person. The applause he had anticipated was hesitant and scattered. The celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. As the doors of the ballroom swung shut behind Lysandra, a reporter from the New York Post, smelling the society scandal of the decade, was already typing furiously into his phone. The headline was already forming in his mind. Leander Crowhurst had just publicly executed his marriage. He thought he had won. He thought he was free. He had no idea that he had just triggered the alarm on his own gilded prison, and the warden, holding all the keys, had just left the building. The heavy doors of the ballroom closed, muffling the chaotic buzz of the crowd behind her. The ornate, hushed corridor of the Pierre felt like a different universe. Lysandra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her composure, the shield she had held up for the last hour, finally wavered. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of pure, unadulterated rage. Maria handed her a handkerchief without a word. "Take me to the car, please," Lysandra said, her voice regaining its steel. "And Mrs. Gable, please call Marcus Thorne. Tell him it's time. Tell him to execute Operation Decimus." Mrs. Gable nodded, her face grim but resolute. She had known this day might come. She pulled out her phone and walked a few paces away, her voice low and urgent. "Decimus?" Maria asked, her brow furrowed in confusion as she pushed the wheelchair towards the private exit. Lysandra allowed herself a small grim smile. "It's Latin, from the phrase decimus fatus, the 10th fate, the one who measures the thread of life before it's cut. Leander just handed me the shears." Back in the ballroom, the atmosphere had curdled. Leander's attempt to restart the festivities fell flat. The shock had morphed into a quiet, judgmental disapproval. Even in their morally flexible world, his public cruelty was a step too far. It was one thing to have a mistress. It was another to parade her pregnant in front of your disabled wife at a charity event. It was messy. It was tacky. And in their circle, being tacky was a greater sin than being immoral. Guests began making their excuses, leaving in a steady stream. Octavia, sensing the shift, clung to Leander's arm, her triumphant smile now looking strained. "Don't worry about them, darling," she purred, though her eyes darted nervously around the emptying room. "They're just jealous. We have a real future. A family." Leander patted her hand, but his eyes were on the exit through which Lysandra had disappeared. Her composure bothered him. It was unnatural. He had expected hysterics, a satisfying validation of his decision to leave such a broken, emotional woman. Instead, her quiet dignity had somehow stolen his thunder, painting him as the villain in his own heroic narrative. "She's probably in shock," he muttered, more to himself than to Octavia. "She'll fall apart tomorrow. She has nothing, no one without me." He put on a brave face, waving to the remaining guests. "Thank you all for coming. A new era for Crowhurst." He was utterly blissfully ignorant. Lysandra did not go back to the Greenwich estate. The specially equipped van arranged by Marcus was waiting. It took her not to a lonely mansion, but to a place Leander didn't even know existed. A sleek, modern penthouse apartment in a discreet building on Central Park West, purchased a year ago under a shell corporation. This was her war room. Inside, Marcus Thorne was waiting. He was a man in his late 60s, with a kind face that belied a mind like a steel trap. He had been Robert Fairbairn's most trusted advisor and loved Lysandra like a daughter. He rose as she entered, his expression a mixture of anger at what she had endured and pride in her strength. "I saw the news alerts," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The man is a fool, a monster without an ounce of decency." He is a narcissist, Marcus Lysandra corrected him, maneuvering her wheelchair over to a large desk, dominated by a bank of computer monitors. And a narcissist's greatest weakness is his own reflection. We are about to shatter the mirror. For the next several hours, the penthouse was abuzz with quiet, focused activity. This was the culmination of 2 years of meticulous planning. The secret her father had built was a masterpiece of legal and financial maneuvering. When Robert Fairbairn had mentored Leander, he hadn't just given him advice, he had given him his seed money. He had been the primary silent investor in the deal that launched Crowhurst Capital. Over the years, as the company grew, Robert never relinquished his stake. He converted it, diversified it, and crucially, kept it quiet. The shares were not held in his name, but in a series of opaque holding companies, and finally consolidated into a single unassailable blind trust, EV Holdings. When Robert died, the trust, along with its sole directorship, passed to his only child, Lysandra Fairbairn. On paper, she was a disabled housewife with a generous but finite allowance from her husband. In reality, she was the largest single shareholder in Crowhurst Capital. She owned 34% of the company, not a controlling interest on its own, but a kingmaker's stake. A stake large enough to sow chaos, to block resolutions, to lead a shareholder revolt. A stake large enough to burn the whole thing to the ground. Leander had no idea. He believed Robert Fairbairn's investment had been bought out years ago, a complex transaction Leander himself had structured. But Robert, ever the strategist, had anticipated Leander's ambition and had created a decoy. The shares Leander thought he'd bought back were a separate, smaller class of stock. The real power, the foundational A-class shares, had been siphoned off into the trust long before. Operation Decimus is live, Marcus confirmed, looking up from his encrypted laptop. The first phase is informational. I've just leaked the details of the gala, the speech, the mistress, the public humiliation, along with select quotes from anonymous guests expressing their disgust to a curated list of financial journalists and influential market bloggers. We're not just making this a society scandal, we're making it a story about character and leadership. Lysandra nodded her eyes on a screen, displaying the pre-market trading data for Crowhurst Capital, ticker BBBC. Character is currency on the street, Marcus. We're about to devalue Leander's significantly. The second phase was more direct. For the past year, Lysandra, through Marcus, had been using the considerable dividends from her hidden holdings to quietly acquire additional shares on the open market through various brokers. She'd also been forming a silent coalition. She had identified other major shareholders who were unhappy with Leander's increasingly arrogant and reckless leadership style, his focus on vanity projects, and his dismissal of the board's more cautious members. One such shareholder was Julian Croft, head of a rival investment firm, and a man Leander had publicly embarrassed a year prior. Marcus had already been in contact with Croft's people. Julian is on board, he said. He's been waiting for an opportunity to get his own back at Leander. With his 12% stake and our 34%, we form a voting bloc of 46%. We only need to sway one more board member. That will be Eleanor Finch, Lysandra said, without hesitation. She controls 6 through the pension fund she manages. She's a pragmatist. She worships stability and fiduciary duty. The news of Leander's recklessness, combined with a sudden unexplained drop in stock value, will make her very nervous. We'll offer her stability. We'll offer her a new CEO. The sun was beginning to rise over Central Park, casting long shadows across the city. The first wave of their attack was about to hit the market. In his Greenwich mansion, Leander finally fell into a restless sleep. Octavia curled up beside him. He dreamt of ringing bells, not wedding bells, but the frantic, clanging opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. He awoke to his phone, buzzing violently on the nightstand. It was his CFO, David Chen. "What is it?" David Leander growled, his head pounding. "Leander, you need to see this. The stock is tanking." Leander sat bolt upright. What? What are you talking about? Pre-market looked fine. That was an hour ago. It just opened and we've plunged. We're down 12% already. The markets are reacting to a story that broke overnight. Several stories, actually. They're everywhere. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, online blogs. It's about the gala, about you, Lysandra, and the announcement. They're calling it a crisis of leadership, questioning your judgment, your stability. Leander's blood ran cold. It's society gossip. Who gives a damn? Wall Street does, apparently. David's voice was frantic. They're seeing a pattern of erratic, impulsive behavior. The optics are catastrophic. They're selling Leander. Everyone is selling. Leander leapt out of bed and rushed to his office. Octavia's sleepy, "What's wrong?" baby trailing behind him. He pulled up the ticker on his screen. BWC was a waterfall of red. Millions of dollars of his net worth were evaporating every second. Then a new alert flashed. Breaking Crowhurst Capital's planned acquisition of Argentum Innovations is facing an unexpected shareholder challenge. "David, what the hell is this about Argentum?" he roared into the phone. "I don't know." "A major shareholder block has filed an injunction demanding a full review. They claim you overvalued Argentum and that it's a vanity project. The motion was filed this morning by a law firm representing a holding company I've never heard of, EV Holdings." Leander stared at the screen, a feeling of profound dread creeping into his soul. This was not random market panic. This was a coordinated attack. The timing, the precision, the use of the media, it was too perfect. Who was EV Holdings? He tried to think, but his mind was reeling. He had made enemies, of course. Julian Croft, maybe? But this felt different, more personal. The leak about the gala. It was too detailed, too intimate. It had to have come from someone who was there, someone close to the situation. His mind raced, but it never once landed on the silent woman in the wheelchair he had cast aside just hours before. He couldn't conceive of it. In his world, Lysandra Fairborn was a casualty, a footnote in his grand story. He had no idea that she was the author of his final chapter. The assault on Crowhurst Capital was relentless and brutally efficient. It was a multi-front war, and Leander, for the first time in his life, was completely on the defensive. The story of the gala, seeded by Marcus Thorne's perfectly targeted leaks, had metastasized from a society scandal into a full-blown corporate governance crisis. The narrative was no longer about a messy divorce. It was about the unstable, erratic judgment of a CEO. Financial news outlets, smelling blood, ran deep-dive articles questioning Leander's recent business decisions, framing them as reckless gambles by a man blinded by ego. In her Central Park war room, Lysandra watched it all unfold with the calm focus of a chess master. She was no longer the tragic victim. She was a general commanding her forces. The Argentum injunction was the first shot across the bow, Marcus reported, pointing to a chart on the screen. It's created uncertainty, and the market hates uncertainty. Now, for the second wave. The second wave was a proxy fight. Through EV Holdings, Lysandra formally challenged the existing board of directors, proposing an alternative slate of candidates. This was a direct declaration of war. She nominated respected independent industry veterans, including the formidable Eleanor Finch, to whom she had secretly offered the position of chairwoman. Julian Croft's firm publicly backed her proposed slate, their combined 46% stake, making the challenge terrifyingly real. The news sent another shockwave through the financial community. BC stock, which had stabilized after the initial plunge, began another steep nosedive. It was now down nearly 25% from its value before the gala. Leander was in a state of perpetual rage. His office at Crowhurst Capital, once a serene sanctuary of power, was now a pressure cooker. He screamed at his lawyers, his traders, his team. "Find out who the hell EV Holdings is," he bellowed during a conference call, pacing like a caged animal. I want a name. I want to know who is behind this. Is it Croft? Is it some foreign fund? I want to know whose throat to slit. But Lysandra and her father had built the fortress well. Eve Holdings was registered in Delaware, shielded by layers of corporate anonymity and represented by the ironclad discretion of Marcus Thorne's law firm. Every legal inquiry hit a brick wall. The pressure began to fracture Leander's new life before it had even truly begun. Octavia, who had imagined a life of serene luxury and social triumph, found herself living with a paranoid, raging tyrant. The romantic dinners were replaced by Leander hunched over his computer, cursing at flashing red numbers. The adoration in his eyes was replaced by a wild, hunted look. "Leander, you promised we'd go look at the new house in the Hamptons," she complained one evening, rubbing her belly. "The Hamptons," he snarled, throwing a financial report across the desk. "I'm losing $100 million a day, and you're talking about beach houses. Do you have any idea what's happening?" "Well, it's not my fault," she retorted, her voice rising. "This is what you wanted. You said getting rid of her would solve everything. It was supposed to." He shot back. "But this is something else. Someone is trying to ruin me. And it started the night I announced we were together." The implication hung in the air that somehow she was the bad luck charm that had brought this all down upon him. The dream was souring fast. Octavia felt a spike of fear. Her entire future was tied to this man, a man who now looked increasingly like a sinking ship. She had played her one great card, the pregnancy, the heir, and it seemed to be failing. Desperate to secure her position, she decided to add a new layer to her own deception. Maybe it's her, Octavia suggested, planting a seed. "Lysandra, maybe she's doing this to get back at you." Leander actually laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Lysandra, don't be ridiculous. She can barely decide what color sweater to wear without her assistant's help. She doesn't have the first clue about how this world works. She's a broken, pathetic creature. This is a professional hit, Octavia. This is a shark, not a goldfish." His dismissal of Lysandra was so complete, so absolute, that the possibility of her involvement was literally unthinkable to him. And that was Lysandra's greatest weapon. While Leander was fighting ghosts, Lysandra was methodically dismantling his power base. Marcus, acting as her proxy, held discreet meetings with major institutional investors. He didn't speak of revenge. He spoke their language: risk, stability, long-term value. He presented a cool, logical case. Leander Crowhurst's recent actions demonstrate a concerning level of personal impulsivity that has directly and negatively impacted shareholder value. He would say, presenting charts of the stock's collapse. His focus has shifted from fiduciary responsibility to personal vendettas and vanity projects like the Argentum deal. The board slate proposed by EV Holdings and its allies is designed to restore stability, install professional oversight, and maximize returns for you, the shareholders. It was working. The tide of institutional support was turning against Leander. Eleanor Finch, the pragmatist, Lysandra, had identified, publicly announced her pension fund would be voting, with the challengers citing a need for a change in leadership to protect our members' investments. Her 6% stake was the tipping point. The coalition now had a majority. They had the votes to oust Leander and seize control of the board at the upcoming emergency shareholder meeting. The final piece of Lysandra's plan was personal, a twist of the knife aimed directly at the heart of Leander's ego. She knew his obsession with legacy, with having a son to carry on the Crowhurst name. It was the entire justification he had used to humiliate her. Through a private investigator she had hired months ago, Lysandra had been monitoring Octavia Rossi. The PI had uncovered something interesting before she had latched onto Leander. Octavia had been involved in a passionate on-again, off-again affair with a struggling artist named Leo Decker. Their final tearful breakup had occurred just before she officially began seeing Leander. The timeline was tight. Lysandra had no interest in exposing Octavia for sport, but she knew that Leander's belief in his heir was the one thing giving him strength, the one pillar of his ego that was still standing amidst the corporate rubble. She decided it was time to kick it out from under him. Marcus, using a secure, anonymous channel, sent a single file to a notorious gossip columnist at the New York Daily News. The file contained a photograph of Octavia and Leo Decker in a passionate embrace dated from a time when she claimed to be exclusively with Leander. It also contained an anonymous tip: ask Leander Crowhurst if he's ever considered a paternity test for his heir. Sources close to Ms. Rossie's former flame say he believes the child is his. The item appeared 2 days before the emergency shareholder meeting. It was a small, salacious squib buried on page 6, but it was all that was needed. Leander's secretary, loyal to him for years, but horrified by his treatment of Lysandra, accidentally left the paper open to that page on his desk. Leander saw it when he returned from another disastrous meeting with his bankers. The words leapt off the page. Paternity test. Former flame. Believes the child is his. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The one pure victory he had claimed, the one thing that made all this chaos worthwhile. His son, his legacy, was suddenly tainted, questioned. He stormed out of his office and drove home to Greenwich at a reckless speed. He found Octavia in the nursery they had been designing, looking at paint swatches. Leander, you're home early. I was thinking a nice soft blue, or maybe He threw the newspaper down on the changing table. What is this? He demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Octavia looked at the paper. All the colour drained from her face. She recognized the photo, the headline. She stammered, It's lies, tabloid trash. You know how they are. Is it a lie? Octavia, Leander's eyes were boring into her, cold and analytical. The way he looked at a flawed balance sheet. Leo Decker. Were you with him when you were with me? No, of course not. I love you. This is just someone trying to hurt us. Probably your wife, she cried, trying to use the same defense as before. But the seed of doubt once planted had taken root in the fertile ground of his paranoia. His entire world was collapsing. Everything he had built was under attack. He was being betrayed on all fronts. Why not this one too? You're going to take a test, he said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. A prenatal paternity test. Tomorrow. It's non-negotiable. Octavia began to sob, a mixture of real fear and theatrical panic. You don't trust me. After everything, I'm carrying your son. Prove it, he said coldly, turning his back on her and walking out of the room. The final pillar of his ego had cracked. He was now a man cornered, betrayed, and for the first time truly alone. He had destroyed his past, and his future was now a terrifying question mark. He still had no idea who was behind his corporate demise, but at this point, it hardly mattered. He had already lost everything of value. The emergency shareholder meeting was in 2 days. He was walking into his own execution, and he didn't even know who had signed the death warrant. The day of the emergency shareholder meeting dawned grey and oppressive, a fitting shroud for the public execution of a king. The meeting was held in the cavernous amphitheatre-style auditorium at Crowhurst Capital's headquarters, a room Leander himself had designed to project power and invincibility. Today, it felt like a tomb. Leander arrived looking like a ghost of his former self. His expensive suit hung on a frame that had lost weight. His face was gaunt and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He had spent the last 48 hours in a hell of his own making. The results of the paternity test were pending, a sword of Damocles hanging over his head, and Octavia had locked herself in her room. Their relationship reduced to bitter whispered accusations through a closed door. He walked to the stage, the usual confident stride replaced by a weary shuffle. He looked out at the assembled shareholders. He saw the cold, calculating eyes of Julian Croft in the front row. He saw the stony, disappointed face of Eleanor Finch. He saw a sea of faces that were either hostile or indifferent. They were vultures gathered to pick his corporate carcass clean. The meeting was called to order. The corporate lawyers droned on reading the motions. The first item on the agenda, the vote to remove and replace the current board of directors, including the chairman and CEO, Leander Crowhurst. Leander was given the floor to make his case. He stood at the podium, the same kind of podium from which he had destroyed his wife just weeks ago. He tried to summon his old charisma, his old fire. Members of the board, esteemed shareholders. He began his voice hoarse. You are being deceived. This is a hostile, opportunistic attack on our company, orchestrated by my rivals to seize control of the assets we have all worked so hard to build. These faceless entities, these holding companies, hiding in the shadows, they don't care about the future of Crowhurst Capital. They care only about a quick profit. He railed for 10 minutes, pleading, threatening, cajoling. But his words were hollow. He looked and sounded like what he was, a defeated man. When he finished, there was a perfunctory scattered applause. Then the lawyer for the opposition was invited to speak. The coalition represented by EV Holdings Croft Investments and the Finch Pension Fund yields its time to its candidate for the new CEO, who will address the shareholders directly. A murmur went through the crowd. Who was this candidate? The name hadn't been publicly announced. It was a masterstroke of dramatic tension. The main doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Silence fell across the room. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway was Lysandra. She was not in the wheelchair Leander had last seen her in. She was standing, aided by a pair of sleek, state-of-the-art robotic leg braces gleaming under the lights. Her silver gown from the gala was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp, custom-tailored Armani power suit in a deep charcoal grey. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her face was calm, confident, and utterly devoid of pity. She looked like an avenging angel of finance. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. Leander stared, his mouth literally falling open. His mind short-circuited. He couldn't process what he was seeing. Lysandra, standing here. Slowly, deliberately, Lysandra walked down the central aisle. The whir of her Ad Fairborn prosthetics was the only sound in the dead-silent room. It was the sound of inexorable progress. It was the sound of his doom approaching. She didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes were locked on one person, and one person only, her husband. She reached the stage, and using a single hand on the railing for balance, ascended the few steps with a grace that defied her condition. She walked straight to the podium, standing beside the shell-shocked Leander. She leaned into the microphone. "Good morning," she said, her voice cool and steady, amplified throughout the auditorium. It was the same voice that had uttered, "I understand," at the gala, but now it held the weight of absolute authority. Leander finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Lysandra, what are you doing here? How?" She turned to him, and for the first time she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a victor, sharp and final. "You asked who EV Holdings was?" "Leander," she said, her voice still being broadcast to everyone in the room. "You've been hunting for a ghost, a rival, a faceless shark. You never thought to look right beside you." She turned back to the microphone. "My name is Lysandra Fairborn, and as of this morning, through my trust EV Holdings, I am the majority shareholder of this company. I am the woman who is about to fire you." The final revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Julian Croft smirked. Eleanor Finch nodded in grim satisfaction. But Leander simply broke. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly pale. He stumbled back from the podium, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning abject horror. It was all her. The stock collapse, the media leaks, the proxy fight, the injunction, the slow, systematic, brilliant dismantling of his entire world. It was the work of the woman he had called fragile, pathetic, and useless. The woman he had humiliated and discarded because he thought she was nothing without him. My father, Robert Fairbairn, was a brilliant man. Lysandra continued, addressing the captivated audience. He was also a cautious one. He saw the rot of unchecked arrogance in Leander long before anyone else did. He never sold his foundational shares in this company. He placed them in a trust for me, to protect me, to protect his legacy from a man who valued his own reflection more than anything else. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. For 5 years, I have watched this man take my father's legacy and twist it into a monument to his own ego. I have watched him preach charity in public while practicing cruelty in private. I watched him stand on a stage and declare me obsolete. He thought my silence was weakness. He thought my stillness was surrender. He was wrong. It was preparation. She looked directly at Leander, whose entire body was trembling. He was speechless. Utterly, completely, profoundly speechless. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion, betrayal, and terror. The world no longer made sense. The vote is a formality, Lysandra announced. My coalition holds a 52% majority. The motion to remove the current board and CEO is passed. A round of solid, decisive applause filled the room. The motion to install the new board chaired by Ms. Eleanor Finch is passed. More applause. And finally, she said, her voice dropping slightly, my first act as the new chief executive officer of this company will be to rename it. Crowhurst Capital is dead. From this day forward, it will be known as Fairbairn Thorne Enterprises, in honor of my father and in partnership with a man who valued loyalty and integrity. She gestured to Marcus Thorne, who stood from his seat in the front row and gave a slight bow. Then she delivered the killing blow. She looked at Leander, her eyes as cold and sharp as shards of ice. You destroyed our marriage for the sake of an heir, Leander. You publicly humiliated me for the promise of a son to carry on your precious name. She held up her phone, which was connected to the room's display system. An email appeared on the giant screen behind her. It was from a medical lab. The subject line read, Paternity Test Results. The results came in an hour ago, Lysandra said calmly. I had them sent to me as well. It seems I'm still listed as your next of kin on your medical files. You should really update that. The camera zoomed in on the key line of the report on the screen. Probability of paternity, 0%. A new wave of gasps, louder this time, filled the room. Leander stared at the screen, at the clinical, damning words, 0%. The final pillar hadn't just cracked. It had been vaporized. The child wasn't his. The legacy was a lie. His grand sacrifice, his cruel justification, it was all for nothing. It was for another man's child. He made a sound, a choked, guttural noise of pure despair. He had lost his company. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his name. He had lost his fabricated future. He had nothing left. Lysandra switched off the display. She looked at the broken man before her, no longer a titan, but a pathetic, hollowed-out shell. She felt no triumph, no joy, only a quiet, final sense of closure. Security, she said into the microphone, her voice firm. Please escort Mr. Crowhurst from the building. He is no longer employed here. 2 uniformed guards moved towards the stage. Leander didn't resist. He was catatonic, a man in a waking nightmare. As they led him away past the staring, silent faces, he was the one who looked fragile. He was the one who was broken. And the woman he had tried to destroy stood tall at the center of his former empire, the undisputed queen of the board. The fallout from Leander Crowhurst's dethronement was absolute. The story of the spurned wife turned corporate queen became legend, and Leander, stripped of his company and his dignity, became a social pariah. He vanished into a shamed obscurity, his empire and his fabricated legacy crumbling to dust. Octavia Rossi disappeared just as quickly, her dreams of a life of luxury ending in a quiet retreat from the city, her tale a cautionary whisper among those who chase fortune. As their world collapsed, Lysandra's was just beginning. She poured her energy into Fairborn Thorn Enterprises with a visionary's focus. The company, freed from the shackles of Leander's ego, thrived under her leadership, climbing to historic new heights. Lysandra herself was transformed in the public eye from a tragic figure into a powerhouse. In a landmark interview, she reframed her narrative for the world. For years, my disability was seen as a weakness. She stated, her state-of-the-art leg braces visible beneath her desk. What my predecessor failed to understand is that my experience didn't diminish me. It gave me a different perspective. It taught me resilience. I'm a better CEO, not in spite of my disability, but because of what it has taught me. She backed these words with monumental action, establishing the Fairborn Foundation for Adaptive Technology. It was a multi-billion-dollar initiative to fund and develop affordable cutting-edge mobility devices for those in need, ensuring others had the same chance at independence she did. The cold Greenwich mansion was sold, its ghosts exorcised. Lysandra found peace in her Central Park penthouse, creating a home filled with warmth and life. A year later, her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, informed her that Octavia had given birth to a boy and was raising him with his biological father. Without hesitation, Lysandra established an anonymous educational trust for the child. He is innocent in all of this, she said simply, an act of grace that defined her character. Lysandra Fairborn never remarried. She found fulfillment not in a partner, but in her purpose. She had been publicly broken, but had refused to be defeated. Instead, she had built a new, better world on the ruins of the one that wronged her, forging a legacy, not of revenge, but of resilience and hope. Lysandra's journey is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always visible. Her husband saw a disabled wife and assumed she was weak, never realizing that her silence was a sign of immense resilience and brilliant strategy. Her story proves that real power lies not in wealth or status, but in the unbreakable courage to defy expectations and write your own triumphant ending. If Lysandra's incredible comeback resonated with you, please show your support with a thumbs up and share this story of ultimate justice. What part shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. For more gripping stories of vindication and empowerment, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss what's next. Thank you for watching.